But my slide title, I guess, is when will I ever use this in real life? Because I'm guessing most of you being teachers, you probably heard that about something. Because it's like, no matter what you're teaching, I feel like you're going to have one kid that thinks it's completely useless. And I know a lot of you know me, but for those of you that don't, I just graduated FC, and I have been coding since 2nd grade. And so I have published lots of apps to the App Store, and I get to use what I learn in my classes every day. And I think that is so fun because it's like I actually get to see the applications, literally, for everything that I learn, whether it's language or math or science or Spanish. There are ways that I can connect it to everything, and I think that has really helped me learn through the years because it makes me interested about it. And if I wasn't interested, I wouldn't have that drive to like keep trying to succeed. And so I just wanted to ask, which of these looks more interesting? Ooh, great. Yeah, the math teachers in here are really excited.
We're excited.
Are you
excited?
No one's excited. Oh, this looks pretty fun to me. You got your sine, cosine, all these things we didn't actually talk about, but they look cool in the picture that I found. And then here's the other option. This is from a game that I made, and it's hard to see, but basically this is like you're going through a maze, and you use your phone to like kind of tilt through the maze, your perspective, and you go through this 3-dimensional maze to find these things to activate beacons. These both use the same math. Like it's the same thing. Like this is what I did to make this. And so knowing this, when I learned it at first, without having this sort of application, it was like, okay, cool, what do I do with this circle? And then when it's like, okay, I want to make a game where I look around, it's like, oh wait, that's circles, because you're swiping, and so it's like, you get your angle of rotation and your sine and your cosine. Like, okay, well, how do I make you go forward based on the angle that you're facing? That's all of these components of the unit circle and the triangles. And so it's like having that sort of connection made it a lot more real to me because numbers aren't just things that, well, they kind of are things we made up, but we made them up so that we can describe things that are real. And so it's like knowing that all of this is a real thing that you can use to your own advantage is, I don't know, I think it's really cool. That's a lot more interesting than this one. And so this, the presentation, you might notice looks a little minimalistic, and that's because there's another conference going on this week called WWDC, and that is Apple's conference for developers. I've been to it before, and now it's online, and so that's why I get to be here instead of in California. And so they have sessions like these that I get to learn from other people who are a lot smarter than me, trying to tell me about these new features that they've developed for iPhones. And their presentations look very similar to this. And so I wanted to try and emulate it because I feel like it's a good template. And so they always have sample code. And so being a coder, I thought I'd include some sample code. And here is my main code for today. It is connection equals learning. And equals means basically you're checking to see if something is the same as something else. And so this returns true. And so I think that for me, and I think for most people, having connections in all different ways is what helps them learn. And so I want to talk real quick about my coding journey because I think it has a lot of parallels that are more general for everyone. And so I've always been interested in games. Like ever since I was little, I had a little magnadoodle that I would draw games on and make my parents play them and be like, today we're playing Hang Brayden 7. It's a variation on Hangman where instead of having the gallows, it's a wire that is broken, and so with every incorrect guess, the electricity gets closer to the end, so you better guess it before Brayden gets electrocuted. Or I'd have Candyland, where this time we're going backwards, and you are using a die instead of cards. And so I've always kind of had that drive to create games and edit things, and so then when my family got an iPod Touch, it was like mind-blowing. And because you could just play any game that you could think of. It existed on there. And so I thought that was so interesting. And I would always just Google things because I grew up in that age where that's a thing you can do. And so if there was ever something I didn't know how to do, I would never thought like, oh, I probably just can't do it yet because I'm too young. I just would look up how to do this. So I Googled how to make game for iPod Touch in 2nd grade. And so that's kind of what started off. I used a program called Stencil to make my first games for the Chrome Web Store, which no longer exists. But they were super simple at first. Here, I'll show you pictures of Stencil. Basically, it's a good introduction for someone who's never done any sort of game development because you can do as much or as little as you want. Oh, we have the escapee.
I don't think people can see it.
Oh, nice. Thank you. Is that better?
Oh, yeah.
Good job. So basically, there's a whole, they call it Stencil Forge was the marketplace where you could go and see stuff other people have created and download it, and they call it remix it for yourself. So that's a good introduction if you've never done something before to get a brick breaker game or a snake game that someone's already made. You can look at all of their block code that they've written for it, which is super easy to read if you've never seen anything before, and kind of reverse engineer it and figure out where you're going with it. And you can do as much or as little of the process as you want. And so it's if you're a good coder but a bad designer, you could go find assets someone's published for free. Go find a little character to run around in your game. And just the editors and stuff were super user-friendly for someone to go from knowing nothing to eventually being able to make stuff on their own. So that was where I started with Stencil. And so then I got better at that, and then in 5th grade I had a Kickstarter to raise money, and then was able to publish my first game to the App Store, which was really exciting for me because it was a big step up from the Chrome Web Store because there's a lot more processes you have to go through, a lot more review boards and things that you have to go through to even get your app on there, and special software and certificates, which is funny to the select few that know what a certificate is because there's so much you have to get yourself authorized on your computer, and it's a lot easier now than it used to be. And so for someone in 5th grade trying to figure out how to get the right permissions on my computer and get into they bring up a thing that looks like you're an old school hacker because it's this little terminal where you just have to type commands in to try and get stuff. You don't have to do any of that anymore. Kids these days have it so easy. And so that was a big step for me in 5th grade to be able to publish that. And then I kept making games, and I eventually abandoned Stencil and started learning Swift, which is a real coding language instead of the blocks. And it's owned by Apple, so it is the language that's used basically to run everything on your phone. And so that's why I picked it, because it's super powerful and has really good integration with all your phone, which is kind of what I wanted, to have that better access. It's also really nice and modern and constantly being updated, so that was really good. And so then, my freshman year, the company game was featured as the game of the day by Apple, and that was really cool to me because Apple didn't know who I was at all. It just, before an app can be published on the App Store, it has to pass through app review, and so they saw my app, and apparently the reviewers decided they liked it and sent it over to the editorial team, who then, they don't tell you any of this, by the way. I just go on the App Store one morning and see that my game was in the pre-order section. It's games coming soon that we love. And I'm wow! And so that was amazing. That kind of started it off. It was featured multiple times. They do ask you if they're going to put a big banner at the top of the store. And when they asked for that, it's sure, go ahead, please. And so that was kind of what started that, because after that, then for the WWDC conference, every year they have a contest for students, which can be students in high school, but mostly it's college-age students, where you can write code in a contest, and they pick 350 of the best entries from the world. And so they get to go out to California for free and spend a week at the conference. So after my freshman, I entered during my freshman year, and after that year I got to go to California, which I'm so glad I did, because that was the last year before COVID, and then everything has been virtual since. So that year was super impactful because I got to go out there, and if you're under 18, they put you in a group of other kids that were the same age as you. And so it was really cool because I was in a group of kids from Britain or Sweden, China, all around, or Boston even, somewhere really crazy. And so that was awesome. And I also got to meet the Apple engineers that make the phones. And like, just was casually talking to someone and was like, oh, he made Safari. So it's like, okay. It just is really neat. I'm pretty sure a guy sitting across from me at the table was working on Pokemon Go, because I looked over at his screen and he was like, I don't know. It just was really cool to see all of that. Basically, it was like, because for me being a solo developer for so long, it's like, oh, I get to see all these people that do the things I do every day. So I think I have pictures, maybe. Oh yes, so here are some of my features, and when I got to go to the conference, some of the like pins and jackets that I won from it. So I just made a quick slide of that just because I think it's helpful for the background. And then the question is, will you use this in real life? Because when I was asked to speak, she's like, you can talk about your coding journey. I'm like, well, what does that have to do with teachers? What are they going to do with this? And so I think now that you know kind of my background, it kind of can tell you how it can be used for one person or for all people. That's kind of how I structured it. I split it up into two. So first I want to talk about for one, and this was stolen from my language teacher this year, Mrs. Atkinson, who's actually talking at the same time. She showed us a TED Talk on the last day of school called The Happy Secret to Better Work by Sean Aker, and it was really good. And he starts it off with this exact same graph. What happened? There we go. Come back. Something happened. I think I'm going the wrong way. No, backwards. That's the opposite of how I would have expected. Swiping to the right makes it go backwards. Now I know. So yeah, he started with this graph, which is the exact, if you just Google the word outlier on Google, this is the first image that shows up, so he didn't even make it. And so the kind of main points from his talk were that, in general, when you're looking at people or data, you want to get rid of the outliers so that you can make a nice best fit curve and figure out what average is supposed to be. And his main point was, do not throw out the outliers, put that back in. And so he thought that instead of bringing everyone to average, what you should do is move the average up. You want to study the outliers, figure out why they're successful, why they are above average, and try to figure out, instead of how you can move everyone to that average mark, how you can move that average up and get everyone else to that level. And so I think that was really, I don't know, I thought it was an interesting way of looking at it. And his other point was that happiness inspires productivity, not necessarily the other way around. So it's like, if you are focusing, instead of how you can be more successful, looking at the areas that you can, I don't know, feel more fulfilled, then that will inspire you to be more productive in those areas, which I think was really helpful for me, because I feel like I was more productive in school when I was looking at how I could apply it to the thing that I wanted to learn about, which was coding. And so how I started was when my second grade teacher recognized that I could do more. Like, this is just one example. There are so many examples of different teachers that have, for me, recognized the level that I was at and wanted to be, and helped me to, like, basically just gave me space. That's the next one. Space and opportunities for me to grow in the areas that I wanted to be at. I mean, I can think back to preschool when I was 3 years old but could read, and my teacher took me to the library and was like, I want to get him started in the accelerated reading program. And the librarian was like, we don't do that until kindergarten. And she's like, let me introduce you to Brayden. One of my favorite memories, because I read so much in preschool. I read all the Magic Tree House books that I could get my hands on. Tree School, yes. And that was just another example where I could follow my interests to see where they would take me based on the people around me giving me that opportunity. And so, some more sample code. This is a little more complicated than equals equals, but I think we can do it. All right. So in coding, a lot of times you want to generalize things so that you can get things that will work for any case. And so a lot of times what you'll do is you'll make a class to represent some sort of data, which in this case is an individual, and you'll give them unique properties. This is kind of cheesy, but it's what works for me. So everyone has unique properties. They have a set of talents, a set of abilities, and a set of interests, and it's unique for each person. And this goes on forever. Everyone has things that are unique about them. And then once you make these classes in coding, what you can do is make functions that will take into account each of those unique properties. So that's this part. You want to, what was most helpful for me at least, is when teachers would adjust for each person's talents, abilities, and interests, and give space for them to follow what was most interesting to them and see how it could be useful. So if the coding isn't working for you, another popular use of these sessions is flowcharts. So we have student has talents, abilities, interests, all those properties that I just showed you. Teacher recognizes the properties. Teacher makes space for growth. And then the student expands the talents, abilities, and interests. And the best part is, it goes back. And it goes around and around as long as there is space for growth, which is always. And so that connection between teacher and student helps learning is kind of the summary of all that. That kind of goes back to my original point about the connection being the same as learning. Like when you are connected with the students, it helps them to learn because then they know that you see them as an individual for all that is unique about them, and they can feel like you care about them and are trying to help them towards what is interesting to them. So that's like on the individual scale. Now I want to talk about for everyone, because not everyone's going to be not everyone's an outlier, basically, is the point. Most people are not outliers, and how are you going to make people that aren't interested in it want to be interested? And so, I read a study from a neurologist, which was interesting. And basically said, if you really want to remember something, your best bet is trying to connect it to some other part of your life or a topic you already know, which I've talked about a lot already, and then sums up. Figure out some other facet of life, why it's relevant, and use it. And so that's kind of the main point of this whole talk is how do you make it relevant to kids who are determined that it is not relevant? And so I think just having those outliers as examples of look how they're using it. I would love in my math class if instead of a teacher saying, oh, we won't actually use this unless you're a math teacher someday, when someone asks. I'm like, no, I used it yesterday. I did this. I bet you would use this in a lot of different ways. And so I would have loved if, instead of saying that you won't use it, you find examples that are relevant to the class. I don't know, I think hearing about another student that's using something is really cool. In my physics class, when one of the kids would make an instrument and talk about how it used resonance of whatever frequencies and stuff. It just is really cool how the instrument is made up of these sound waves. And so I think that connection of this is actually something that you can use in real life. Because I can think of so many examples. Earlier this week, I was trying to make views that instead of being a parallelogram instead of being a square were parallelograms. And so I used math to make it so that it would shear at a certain angle, and so that all of the views would match and be parallel to each other, even regardless of their size. It's kind of like a random use, but my notebook was filled with drawings that looked like something out of a math class, but I was doing it for fun, and I was doing it for an actual purpose instead of just to finish the homework assignment. And then, when I'm writing stories for my games, I'm using techniques that I learned in language class. I'm trying to make sure that the plot is cohesive and all of that. And then, now I'm working on localization to other languages, and having taken Spanish, I get to see how I have a deeper understanding of how translations work, and I think those skills have also helped me in coding, because learning a coding language and learning Spanish are pretty parallel to me. And so I think that the connection between material and real life also helps learning. That's my second point. And then, guess what? Bonus point. This is for all, everyone. Because what's really important to me when I do something is how it can impact everyone, not just myself. I don't like to do things that are just for me, usually. When I partnered with Nadine Gilkison to make the blending board app for helping to teach reading and phonics recognition, that was something that is more than just I didn't really get anything out of it. Like, it's a free app. There's not super like monetary reward or anything, but it's still something I wanted to do and was really important to me more than getting money. And I partnered with a nonprofit that is working to abolish human trafficking overseas and sell decks for them in my game Solitaire, so you can buy an A21 deck that has art from them, and the proceeds all go towards that effort. And I have little blurbs about it in the app to like help raise awareness, even if you can't like donate. And so I just think being able to have those opportunities was really important for me because it makes me care about it more when I am seeing how I can use it for others. Like if coding was just gonna be for me, I don't know that I'd be interested in it for as long as if I could actually help people. Like I've gotten to speak at like youth retreat stuffs for church because of some of my apps that I've made. And I think being able to have that sort of impact is really important and getting those opportunities. And so that's what I say. Most important is how the things you learn can help others. And so I think there is space as a teacher to kind of talk about not just how things are used, but how things are used to help others. Like how what you are learning can have a positive impact on other people. So that's the final piece. Connection to others helps everyone. It's not, it helps other people, it helps yourself. I think that's really important to me, and so I wanted to share all of that with you. And that is the end. Thank you very much.